Can you pretend to be my son today? The shocking question came from an 86-year-old woman in a faded floral dress whose frail hand had just slammed down onto the booth of the biggest, most heavily tattooed Hell's Angel in the room. Her fearless march past the pool tables had already brought the roadside dive bar to a dead, stunned silence. Rusty's Iron Horse Saloon in Bakersfield, California, was not the sort of establishment that welcomed unannounced walk-ins, let alone octogenarians clutching worn leather purses. The air inside was thick with the scent of stale beer, motor oil, and cheap tobacco. At the back of the dimly lit room sat Arthur Grizzly Pendleton, the president of the local Hells Angels charter. Grizzly was a mountain of a man, his arms a tapestry of faded prison ink and clawed patches, a deep scar cutting through his thick, graying beard. When Eleanor Carmichael pushed through the swinging wooden doors, the heavy metal music playing from the jukebox seemed to dial itself down. Eleanor, 86 years old, relying heavily on a wooden cane, did not look left or right. Her silver hair was pinned up immaculately, and her posture, though bowed by age, carried an undeniable iron rod of defiance. A prospect near the door stepped forward, raising a hand. "Hey, lady, I think you're lost. I know exactly where I am," Eleanor snapped, her voice raspy but sharp as shattered glass. She bypassed the young biker entirely, her eyes locked on Grizzly. The seasoned bikers around the table stopped talking. Silas, the club sergeant-at-arms, leaned forward, a menacing smirk playing on his lips, but a subtle gesture from Grizzly kept him seated. Grizzly watched the old woman approach, his dark eyes betraying nothing. Eleanor stopped at the edge of his table. She didn't ask for permission. She simply pulled out a rickety wooden chair and sat down across from the giant outlaw. "Can you pretend to be my son today?" she asked. Silas choked on his beer. A ripple of rough laughter echoed from the neighboring tables. Grizzly didn't laugh. He leaned forward, resting his massive forearms on the sticky wood of the table, the leather of his cut creaking under the strain. "Lady," Grizzly rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding in a cement mixer, "I think you forgot to take your medication. Do I look like the kind of guy who bakes cookies and mows lawns?" "You look," Eleanor said, unflinching, "like a man who knows how to deal with bullies. My son's name is David. He's been gone for 12 years. And at 3 o'clock this afternoon, a man named Richard Sterling is coming to my house to force me to sign away my home." At the mention of Richard Sterling, the atmosphere in the bar shifted abruptly. The lingering chuckles died in the throats of the surrounding bikers. Grizzly's jaw tightened. Richard Sterling was a ruthless real estate developer and predatory lender who had spent the last 5 years buying up half of Bakersfield, often through extortion, arson, and intimidation. Sterling had crossed the club more than once, using local politicians to harass their legitimate businesses. "Sterling," Grizzly muttered, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "He's a snake. But what makes you think I give a damn about your house?" "Because," Eleanor said, reaching into her purse with a trembling, arthritic hand, "you owe him." She slid a worn, dog-eared photograph across the table. Grizzly looked down at it. It was a picture taken at a high school graduation nearly 4 decades ago. There were 2 teenage boys in the photo, laughing, their arms draped over each other's shoulders. One was a skinny, bright-eyed kid with glasses, David. The other was a broader, tougher-looking teen, with a fresh black eye and a leather jacket. Grizzly stared at the photograph. He reached out with a scarred finger, tracing the image of his younger self. "David Carmichael," Grizzly whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. He looked up at Eleanor, the hard lines of his face softening for just a fraction of a second. "You're Mrs. Carmichael. You used to make us those terrible meatloaf sandwiches when we skipped school." "They were excellent sandwiches, Arthur," Eleanor corrected him smoothly. "And David never stopped talking about you, even after you went your way and he went his." He became an auditor. You became this. She gestured to the bar, the bikers, the patches, but he always said you were the most fiercely loyal person he ever knew. Grizzly remained silent, the memories washing over him. David had been the only kid in town who didn't judge him for having a deadbeat dad. David found something before he died, Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. He was auditing one of Sterling's shell companies. He found the blood money. He hid the ledgers in my house, Arthur. Sterling didn't know about them then, but he suspects it now. He's been terrorizing me for months, cutting my phone lines, poisoning my dog. Today he's coming with his lawyers and his muscle to make me sign the deed, so he can tear the place down and destroy whatever is hidden inside. Grizzly slowly pushed his chair back. He looked at Silas, then at another biker named Jackson, nodding once. What time did you say this snake is showing up, Mom? Grizzly asked, a dangerous, predatory smile finally breaking through his beard. Elmwood Drive was a quiet, tree-lined street that looked like a postcard from the 1970s, though Eleanor's house stood out. The lawn was meticulously kept, but the front porch had a heavy crude padlock on the screen door, and one of the living room windows was boarded of a remnant of a brick thrown through it 3 nights prior. At 2:30 p.m., the deafening roar of V-twin engines shattered the suburban tranquility. 3 heavy Harley-Davidson motorcycles pulled into Eleanor's narrow driveway, their chrome gleaming under the California sun. Grizzly kicked his kickstand down, followed by Silas and Jackson. They were massive, intimidating figures wearing their full colors, heavy boots, and dark sunglasses. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, equal parts terrified and fascinated. Eleanor stood on the porch, waiting. "You're late," she reprimanded lightly, unlocking the screen door. "Traffic," Grizzly grunted, stepping into the living room. The house smelled of lavender and old paper. It was a stark contrast to the man now occupying it. Silas carefully sidestepped a delicate porcelain figurine on a doily, looking terrified he might break it. "All right," Grizzly said, taking off his sunglasses. "If I'm David, we need to get our story straight. The last time Sterling checked, David was dead. A car accident, right? A hit and run," Eleanor corrected, her eyes darkening. "An unsolved hit and run. Sterling has a copy of the death certificate. So, we aren't going to tell him you're David. We are going to let him assume you're David's older, unmentioned brother from out of state. Or better yet, we just don't tell him who you are at all. We let him ask." "I like that," Jackson chuckled from the kitchen doorway, where he was already helping himself to a glass of water. "Keep the suit guessing." At precisely 3 p.m., a sleek, black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb. The doors opened and Richard Sterling stepped out. He was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair slicked back perfectly. He possessed the arrogant, entitled swagger of a man who was used to buying whatever he couldn't steal. He was flanked by 2 heavily built men in cheap suits, ex-cops or private security, the kind whose morals were easily purchased. Inside, Grizzly positioned himself in the shadows of the hallway, just out of sight of the front door. Silas and Jackson melted into the adjoining dining room, out of view. Eleanor sat in her floral armchair, a crochet blanket over her lap, looking frail and helpless. Sterling didn't bother knocking. He turned the handle, found it unlocked, and pushed the door open, stepping inside with all the respect of an invading army. "Eleanor," Sterling announced smoothly, pulling a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "I hope I find you well. I brought the final paperwork. It's time we stopped this silly resistance, don't you think? The neighborhood is changing. You don't want any more unfortunate accidents happening around here." Eleanor didn't look up. "I told you, Richard. I'm not selling. My son wouldn't want me to." Sterling sighed dramatically, a cruel, mocking sound. "Eleanor, dear, your son is dead. He's been dead for over a decade. It's just you. You're alone. And quite frankly, I'm done asking nicely. He snapped his fingers, and one of the goons stepped forward, pulling a pen from his pocket. Sign the paper, Eleanor, or we are going to start tearing the walls down right now to look for asbestos. I have the city permits to condemn this place. She said she ain't selling. The voice boomed out of the hallway, deep, resonant, and vibrating with violence. Sterling froze. His two hired muscles instinctively reached for the bulges inside their jackets, turning toward the sound. Grizzly stepped out of the shadows. In the cramped, dainty living room, the Hell's Angel looked even larger than he had in the bar. He crossed his massive arms, his leather cut creaking, the infamous Death's Head logo glaring on his chest. Sterling's confident sneer faltered, his eyes darting over Grizzly's tattoos and the grim, unblinking stare. "Who the hell are you?" Sterling demanded, trying to maintain his authority. "Get out of this house. This is private property." "You're right. It is?" Grizzly said, taking a slow, heavy step forward. "My mother's property. Your mother?" Sterling stammered, looking from the giant biker to the frail old woman in the chair. "David was an only child. Eleanor doesn't have another son. She adopted me," Grizzly lied flawlessly, his voice dripping with venom. "I'm the black sheep, the one who doesn't work in an office, the one who doesn't play by the rules of polite society, and the one who gets really, really angry when suits in cheap Italian wool threaten his mother." As if on cue, Silas and Jackson stepped out from the dining room, blocking the exit. The two hired goons looked at the three Hell's Angels, quickly doing the math in their heads. They slowly moved their hands away from their jackets. They were paid to intimidate an old lady, not to start a shootout with an outlaw motorcycle club in broad daylight. "This is ridiculous," Sterling sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "I have legal claim." Grizzly crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing Sterling by the lapels of his expensive suit. He lifted the developer until he was on his tiptoes, slamming him hard against the floral wallpaper. The picture frames rattled. "Listen to me very carefully, Dick," Grizzly whispered, his face inches from Sterling's, his breath hot. "If you ever come to this street again, if you ever look at this house again, if a single blade of grass on this lawn dies, I will bring 50 of my brothers to your gated community in the hills. We won't bring paperwork. Do we understand each other?" Sterling, trembling visibly, swallowed hard and nodded. Grizzly released him, letting the man drop to the floor in a heap. Sterling scrambled up, grabbed his briefcase and practically sprinted out the door, his 2 bodyguards shoving past each other to get out first. The roar of the navigator speeding away faded down the street. Grizzly rolled his shoulders, a smirk finally crossing his face. He turned back to Eleanor, who was smiling serenely in her chair. "Well," Grizzly said, "that takes care of the immediate problem. But he's a rat. He'll try to find another way." Eleanor stood up slowly, her cane tapping against the hardwood floor. The frail, helpless demeanor vanished entirely. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "I know he will," Eleanor said, walking over to the fireplace. "Which is why intimidation isn't enough, Arthur. We need to bury him." She knelt down with surprising agility, using her cane to pry up a loose floorboard beneath the heavy oak mantel. She reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a heavy, dust-covered metal lockbox. "I told you David found the ledgers," Eleanor said, setting the box on the coffee table. She pulled a small key from a chain around her neck and clicked the lock open. Grizzly leaned in, expecting to see stacks of accounting books. Instead, he saw bundles of cash, a massive diamond necklace, and a series of USB drives, alongside a thick, leather-bound journal. "My son wasn't just an auditor, Arthur," Eleanor said softly, staring at the box. "He worked for the FBI. He was deep undercover, building a federal RICO case against Sterling's entire syndicate. And Sterling isn't just a real estate developer." Eleanor looked up, her gaze locking onto Grizzly's. "Who's the man laundering money for your rival club, the Iron Syndicate?" If we leak this to the feds, Sterling goes away forever. If we leak it to the streets, well, I imagine you and your brothers would know exactly what to do with a man funding your enemies. Grizzly stared at the old woman, a chill running down his spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He had come here to protect a helpless old lady. Now he realized he was looking at the most dangerous person in the room. The silence in Eleanor Carmichael's living room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Grizzly stared at the contents of the metal lockbox, the heavy gold of the diamond necklace catching the afternoon light, but his eyes were fixed on the black USB drives. Silas, who had spent a decade navigating the treacherous waters of outlaw biker politics, crossed his arms, his leather cut creaking in the quiet. "Wait a minute," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "You're telling me your boy wasn't just pushing pencils. He was Federal Bureau, and Sterling is washing cash for the Iron Syndicate?" "That is exactly what I am telling you," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, completely devoid of the frailty she had projected just 20 minutes earlier. She picked up the thick, leather-bound journal and ran a weathered thumb over the cover. David spent 3 years undercover. He infiltrated Sterling's holding company as a senior auditor. He found the offshore accounts, the shell corporations in Panama, the real estate fronts here in Bakersfield. Sterling has been taking the syndicate's drug and extortion money, buying up distressed properties, and washing the cash through construction loans. Jackson let out a low whistle. The Iron Syndicate was a rival motorcycle club that had been a thorn in the Hells Angels' side for years. They were notoriously violent, moving heavy narcotics through the valley, but the Angels could never figure out how they were funding their massive legal defenses and rapid expansion. "If the syndicate finds out Sterling lost the ledgers," Grizzly muttered, the gears turning in his head, "they'll butcher him. They don't tolerate loose ends." "Sterling knows that," Eleanor said, looking directly at Grizzly. "That is why he is so desperate to tear this house down to the studs. He doesn't know exactly what David hid, but he knows David came here the night he died. He's been terrified for 12 years that the FBI was going to kick his door down. When they didn't, he assumed the evidence was lost. But recently the feds started quietly auditing his partners. He panicked." Grizzly felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. A dark realization was beginning to surface, something he had pushed down for over a decade. He looked at the photograph of him and David again. "Mom," Grizzly started, his voice unusually gentle for a man of his size. "You said David died in a hit and run. But if he was an FBI agent building a RICO case..." Eleanor's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. The sorrow had long ago burned away, leaving only cold, hardened ash. "It wasn't an accident, Arthur." A black SUV ran his sedan off the road and into the ravine on Route 99. The local police, some of whom were on Sterling's payroll, ruled it a tragic accident. The FBI suspected foul play, but without David's ledgers, their case fell apart. They couldn't prove it. She pushed the metal box across the coffee table toward Grizzly. "I have sat in this house for 12 years, Arthur," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I watched that suited monster buy up my neighborhood, grease the palms of politicians, and live a life of luxury built on my son's blood. I couldn't go to the local police. I didn't know which FBI agents I could trust. But I trust you, because David trusted you." Grizzly stood frozen. The Hells Angels had a strict code. They did not work with law enforcement. They did not act as informants. Handing this box over to the FBI would be a direct violation of the rules of the street. But this wasn't about club business anymore. This was about David. It was about the skinny kid who had shared his lunch with a hungry, angry teenager who had nothing. Silas stepped up beside his president, reading the conflict on Grizzly's face. "Boss," Silas said quietly, "we hand this to the alphabet boys. We cross a line. We keep it. We got a target on our backs from the syndicate and Sterling's crooked cops. We aren't giving it to the feds," Grizzly said, his voice dropping an octave, taking on a dangerous, gravelly edge. He looked at Eleanor. "We're going to use it. If Sterling is washing money for the syndicate, he's the linchpin. We pull the pin. The whole grenade goes off in their faces." Eleanor offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. "I was hoping you would say that." "How do we start?" "We set a trap," Grizzly said, turning to Jackson. "Jacko, get the encrypted burner. Call Sterling's private office. Tell him the adopted brother found something under the floorboards that belongs to him. Tell him it's going to cost him $2 million in clean cash to get it back." "He won't pay," Silas argued. "He'll bring the Iron Syndicate to kill us and take it." "Exactly." Grizzly smiled, a terrifying expression that showed too many teeth. "We want him to bring the syndicate. We're going to give them a family reunion they will never forget." Midnight at the old rail yards on the outskirts of Bakersfield was a desolate, shadowy place. It was one of Sterling's distressed properties, an abandoned warehouse district he had purchased to launder a massive influx of syndicate cash, currently sitting empty and rotting. Grizzly stood in the center of the largest warehouse, illuminated only by the headlights of his Harley and a single flickering overhead bulb. In his right hand he held the heavy metal lockbox. Silas, Jackson, and 20 other fully patched Hell's Angels were completely concealed in the darkness of the catwalks, shipping containers, and side offices. They were armed, silent, and waiting. At 12:15 a.m., the rumble of heavy engines echoed through the corrugated steel walls. It wasn't the refined hum of Sterling's Lincoln Navigator. It was the aggressive, unbaffled roar of custom choppers. A fleet of motorcycles rolled into the warehouse, cutting their engines. Behind them pulled in a black armored SUV. Over a dozen men dismounted. They wore the colors of the Iron Syndicate. At their head was Gage, the Syndicate's ruthless enforcer, a man with a shaved head, a spiderweb tattoo covering his throat, and a sawed-off shotgun resting casually against his thigh. The door to the SUV opened and Richard Sterling stepped out. He looked pale, sweating profusely in the cool night air. He stayed behind Gage, using the biker as a human shield. "Just you?" Gage called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Sterling said the Hells Angels were involved. Looks like they sent one fat old bear to do a club's job." Grizzly didn't flinch. "I'm the only one who needs to be here, Gage. Sterling owes me $2 million, or this box goes to the Los Angeles Times." "You don't get it, do you, biker?" Sterling sneered, his courage returning now that he was surrounded by heavily armed muscle. "You're not getting a dime. Gage, kill him. Take the box. Burn the rest of the building." Gage racked his shotgun, the clack-clack echoing loudly. "Sorry, Grizzly. Nothing personal. Just business." "You're right," Grizzly said calmly. "It is business. But you should probably check the merchandise before you start shooting." Grizzly kicked the metal box across the concrete floor. It slid and hit Gage's boot. Gage frowned, keeping his weapon trained on Grizzly, and nodded to one of his prospects. The young biker knelt down, popped the loose latch, and opened the lid. He pulled out a stack of papers and a USB drive. But it wasn't the ledgers. It was a stack of printed emails and bank transfer receipts. "What is this?" Gage barked, snatching the papers. He held them up to the headlights. His eyes widened as he read. They were wire transfers. Millions of dollars moving from the Iron Syndicate's accounts into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. But the account didn't belong to the club. The name on the account was Richard Sterling. "What the hell is this, Sterling?" Gage turned slowly, the barrel of the shotgun drifting toward the developer. "You've been skimming from our wash, taking 20% off the top." Sterling's face drained of all color. No, that's impossible. That's a forgery. I never stole from the club, Gage, I swear to God." "Actually," Grizzly interrupted, his voice booming through the warehouse, "he didn't. Those papers are completely real. But Sterling didn't set up that account. The FBI did. 12 years ago, an undercover agent named David Carmichael set up a honey trap. He routed your money into a federal holding account, making it look like Sterling was stealing it. Age stared at Grizzly, then back at the terrified developer. And the best part? Grizzly smiled. David Carmichael's mother just mailed the real ledgers, the decryption keys, and the IP logs straight to the director of the FBI in Washington. She bypassed the local cops entirely. Which means, Gage, you and your entire club are currently standing next to a federal informant. You set me up, Sterling screamed, stepping back toward the SUV. Gage, he's lying. The old woman had the box. The old woman is a ghost, Grizzly said. And you're out of time. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to pierce the night. Not just one or two. It sounded like the entire Bakersfield Police Department, backed by federal armored vehicles, was descending on the rail yard. The FBI had received Eleanor's package, realized the magnitude of the bust, and tracked Sterling's burner phone directly to the warehouse. Panic erupted among the Iron Syndicate. Cops, one of them yelled. Gage swung his shotgun toward Sterling, his face twisted in fury. You rat bastard! But before Gage could pull the trigger, Grizzly raised his hand. From the shadows of the catwalks, 20 Hell's Angels rocked their weapons in unison. The sound was deafening. The headlights of the incoming police cruisers began to flash through the high windows of the warehouse. Drop it, Gage. Silas's voice boomed from the darkness above. You're surrounded by us, and you're surrounded by the feds. You fire a shot, we drop you. You stay put, you take your Ryko charge, and let the lawyers handle it. Gage looked up at the rafters, realizing he had walked into a beautifully orchestrated meat grinder. With a roar of frustration, he threw his shotgun onto the concrete. The rest of the syndicate reluctantly followed suit, putting their hands on their heads as the heavy steel doors of the warehouse were violently breached by FBI SWAT teams. In the chaos of tear gas, shouting federal agents, and blinding tactical lights, the Hell's Angels melted away. They knew the layout of the warehouse better than the police. Slipping out through subterranean maintenance tunnels and back alley exits, their bikes already stashed safely blocks away, Sterling was thrown face first onto the hood of his own SUV, handcuffs biting into his wrists, weeping as a federal agent read him his rights. The next morning, the sun rose over Elmwood Drive, casting a warm golden light over Eleanor Carmichael's perfectly manicured lawn. The heavy padlock was gone from the screen door. Grizzly pulled his Harley up to the curb, cutting the engine. He didn't wear his colors today, just a plain black t-shirt and jeans. He walked up the path and knocked on the door. Eleanor answered, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to the giant biker. I saw the morning news, she said softly, taking a sip. A massive federal raid. The Iron Syndicate leadership arrested. Richard Sterling indicted on 64 counts of money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. He'll never see the outside of a cell, Grizzly nodded, staring out at the quiet street. And the syndicate is broken. They won't be bothering anyone in Bakersfield for a long time. Eleanor looked up at Grizzly, her eyes softening. Thank you, Arthur. You risked your freedom to help an old woman. I didn't do it for an old woman, Grizzly said, taking a sip of the black coffee. I did it for my brother. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old, dog-eared graduation photo, handing it back to her. Eleanor took it, holding it against her chest. He would be proud of you, she whispered. Grizzly turned and walked back to his motorcycle. He kicked the engine over, the roar shattering the quiet morning one last time. He gave Eleanor a single, respectful nod before peeling away down the street, leaving the past behind him. Eleanor Carmichael kept her quiet suburban home, its walls no longer holding deadly secrets, but the memory of a son avenged. Arthur Grizzly Pendleton rode away with his brothers, the debt of a childhood friendship finally paid in full. The Bakersfield streets grew quieter. stripped of corporate corruption and rival blood. Sometimes the most dangerous justice doesn't ride a motorcycle, it sits in a floral armchair, waiting patiently.